Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, happy Thursday. Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, wherever you podcast. Thank you so much for doing that. We got lots to cover today. We've got folks protesting on college campuses from sea to shining sea. And we've got the White House taking a victory lap over a TikTok ban that I don't think really resonates well with the under 30 voter, obviously, nor does their position on Gaza and Israel, as we've seen on college campuses. And I'm just left wondering, what are we doing, guys? But let's start at home here first, because another one of these, what are we doing here, guys, moments is starting to come together. The picture is becoming more and more clear here that we don't really have the cohesive, forward-thinking momentum in city governance that we may have thought we had weeks ago. First, this from WAGA, Fox TV, Fox Local 5 here.
One of Atlanta's crown jewels will soon pick up even more steam. Officials announced today that they will speed up construction of the Beltline to get the vast majority of it done before millions of people descend on Atlanta for the FIFA World Cup in 2026.
Okay, so let's stop and think for a second here. If you come to Atlanta for World Cup soccer, venue, downtown Atlanta, nowhere near any stretch of the Atlanta Beltline, why does anyone locally think that those who are coming to a FIFA World Cup soccer match, or all of them, all 8 of them, I think we're going to have in Atlanta, why does anyone think that those staying at the hotels that are going to be predominantly downtown serving World Cup patrons at the venue that's also downtown and nowhere near the Beltline, why does anyone think that that is such a big deal to have most of the Beltline completed in time for those patrons? Y'all, this is not the Champs-Elysees. This is not the French Quarter. This is, give me another. This is not the tourist destination that folks are going to be flying into Atlanta and having on their bucket list. Oh, well, in Atlanta, yes, we see soccer match, but maybe we also go to the Beltline. No, y'all, this is not tying this to completion or near completion for the FIFA World Cup. Who is this benefiting? Why does this look good for anybody other than I don't really know. I mean, listen, I'm happy that this thing's getting completed, but tying this to the FIFA World Cup as if this is some sort of feather in our cap, well, we still don't have enough transit options that get folks from those same hotels, the Marriott Marquis, the Hilton, the Hyatt, et cetera, and so on, to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, aside from an Uber, a Lyft, or a hotel shuttle, all of which require pavement and traffic and guidance and cops in 2026. But hey, the Beltline will be mostly completed in time for FIFA World Cup so that all the patrons that come here not to check out the Beltline will at least have it well down their list of things that they could maybe do while they're here. Okay. Back to the journalism.
Fox 5's Tyler Finger is live on Atlanta's west side tonight near Washington Park, where construction on the Beltline is happening right now. Tyler?
On a nice spring day, it's hard to beat the great outdoors. And that's why many flock to Atlanta's Beltline for a run, stroll, or bike ride.
Probably the only reason that I've stayed in Atlanta this long.
Alejandro Fernandez lives near here and is on it constantly.
Every weekend we just walk up and down the Beltline. It's fun, a lot of restaurants, fun stops, characters like that, so it's cool.
Yes, Alejandro, how about when the weather is a little frightful, a little rainy, windy, or cold? Do you do that then? No? Oh.
Wednesday, city and Beltline leaders announced they're accelerating construction of the Beltline Southside Trail. The goal to make sure it's ready before all the fans come to Atlanta for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Once completed, there would be a continuous paved Beltline trail from Piedmont Park south toward Peoplestown up to the west side, stretching about 16 miles.
You know what would actually bring FIFA World Cup folks staying near the downtown venue to the Beltline? The streetcar that's supposed to be extended to the line.
You are about to see your dollars at work delivered ahead of schedule and under budget.
Well, transit wasn't the focus of Wednesday's announcement. Mayor Andre Dickens and the Beltline CEO said it's something they're focused on. They won't guarantee that it will be the Atlanta streetcar, but they did vow there will be transit of some sort.
Yes, e-bikes, e-scooters, that's transit of some sort, and we already have that cluttering the Beltline. The mayor earlier this week pitching maybe the self-driving car that we had at Truist Park that held 6 people, but also requires pavement that requires upkeep that rail doesn't require as much of.
They say their goal is to make sure it's something that makes sense for the future.
We're not doing this only for you and I that walk on the Beltline today, but what about for your grandkids, your great-grandkids?
Atlanta Beltline CEO Clay Higgs, who, by the way, is non-committal about Beltline Rail, but actually kind of makes some sense there. It's not about the now, it's about the future. You know, a future where Atlanta is more populated because we have better density and need more ability to travel in mass, like, I don't know, mass transit.
For now, the one thing that is certain, accelerating construction of the Beltline will mean 85% of it will be completed by 2026. And Beltline leaders say they're on track to have the entire 22-mile stretch of the Beltline open by 2030.
By the way, I'm seeing a lot of social media bluster, I don't know, so much insinuating a boycott, or at least letting folks be mindful of businesses who have propped themselves up along the Beltline, who enjoy what the Beltline has wrought them by foot traffic or skateboard or scooter or e-bike, but who don't now want to include, again, what was initially in the Beltline's core DNA, the inclusive transportation systems mentioned in the heart of the Beltline's stated mission. Job creation, inclusive transportation systems, affordable housing among them. These businesses include Ladybird Grove and Mess Hall, the Ranger Station, Muchacho, Kevin Rathbun Steak. We love Kevin Rathbun Steak. 2 Urban Licks, Bully Boy, Tap, Lingering Shade Social Club. I like Lingering Shade. The Ice Box. Everything and anything Portman Holdings has their fingers on. Did I miss anybody here? Electric Events Catering among them. And again, these are just names that you see bandied about that are owned by people who now oppose the rail component to the Beltline. And again, you have to ask them, what does your business do for business when the weather absolutely sucks? Do you just rely on Uber and Lyft drivers getting your patrons to the parking lot so that they can dodge whatever wind or rain or snow, whatever they're avoiding to get into your place? Because without the transit on the Beltline, no one's on the Beltline in those conditions. And again, I'm not advocating for a boycott of any of these businesses, although what you do with the information is for you to do. Listen, this has been going on since, I mean, you can go back as far as 2019 when Beltline rail activists were marching along the Beltline, holding rallies, looking for MARTA to be held accountable, chanting, "We pay the tax, now lay the tracks." Stephen Deere at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution covering this back in 2019, before the pandemic and supply chain and inflation, and MARTA was already backtracking. Let me read a little bit of this. The group that organized Sunday's protest, Beltline Rail Now, says that the key to realizing the project's original vision lies in an accelerated plan to build more light rail that allows people to navigate the city without a car. It's almost as if they knew the longer you let this linger on, the more likely it is that civic officials are going to back away from it. And organizers said that's the plan they were originally sold when MARTA and the city of Atlanta urged voters to approve a transit sales tax in 2016. Now they say that other projects have been prioritized ahead of the Beltline. This isn't 2019. This isn't last week. This isn't just a couple weeks ago after Mayor Andre Dickens announced, 4 new infill stations for MARTA. When we were starting to wonder then, wait, where is that money coming? Is that coming from money that still left to be allocated to Beltline Rail? And still haven't really gotten an answer about that. Nothing clear anyway. Back to this article from 2019, let me remind you. What we've got is a sidewalk to gentrification, according to Matthew Rao, co-chair of Beltline Rail now. Without the transit, we've got more cars and more parking, and we end up with an asset that only the fit, the young, and the wealthy can use, and we pay for it with our tax dollars. A reminder what the Beltline's vision was supposed to include all along. Inclusive transportation options, affordable housing. You seeing any affordable housing along the Beltline? Are you seeing inclusive transportation options? This article in Rough Draft Atlanta from 2020, John Rooch, the headline, leaders say Atlanta Beltline must not become part of infrastructural racism. But it's starting to feel a lot like, okay, so we're going to have this loop-de-loop around the city, but the rail part kind of makes it easier for folks to get from one part of town to the other. And, we're not real comfortable with that here in Metro Atlanta, historically speaking. John writing, leaders of the organization building the Atlanta Beltline Park, Trail, and Transit System have issued statements blasting systemic racism and inequities in the wake of protests over the death of George Floyd. 2020. Remember 2020? The statements, in part, address criticism of the Beltline's own role in displacing minority communities, saying it must not become part of infrastructural racism. The June 3rd, 2020 statements came from Clyde Higgs, CEO of Atlanta Beltline, Inc., and Rob Bronner, Executive Director of the Atlanta Beltline Partnership. ABI is the group building and operating the Beltline, while ABP is its fundraising arm that carries out such community missions as creating affordable housing. The Beltline is planned as a loop around central Atlanta, largely using old rail lines. We had rail lines there. Interesting. And intended as a way to unify the city and boost economic opportunity. Actually, I'm kind of digging this going back in time thing, because while we've got Atlanta Beltline CEO Clay Higgs kind of non-committal now about Beltline rail transit, back in 2020, we stand with advocates who are calling for an end to structural inequities in the creation of more equitable conditions in our communities. The Beltline was envisioned as a beacon of light, a catalyst for hope, and a bridge between communities where barriers once stood. That's the same guy who's like, maybe not so much on the rail now. Make it make sense, y'all. Let me read for you an Instagram post from Darren Givens, who we had on the show months and months ago, from Thread ATL. He writes, there are many logical reasons to cast a critical eye on the streetcar extension to the East Side Beltline, and we should never spend this much money without arguing. But folks, please stop acting like we can only build rail for the current conditions in a place. This wrong assumption is the foundation for too many arguments against Beltline rail. We should build rail for the future version of Atlanta, Obviously, we're screwed up in the past and built rail for, quote, current conditions and not for walkable growth, and that's a set of mistakes we should remember. We built the MARTA heavy rail system to service commuter lines to a downtown central business district as it existed in the 1970s. But the system ended up being dwarfed by both job sprawl and residential sprawl, while too many of our rail stations were ensconced in parking lots and low-density development. And we built a streetcar for tourists that runs mostly empty throughout the week because we included no walkable density plan, leaving it surrounded by too many parking lots and empty properties, and saddling it with interstate access points that challenge walkability. So let's learn from our mistakes, Darren Givens writes, and start matching investment in high-capacity transit with transit-supportive density for the future. Is the Beltline a great place for doing that? Darren says, I think so. It's a growth corridor, and the route is level for rail with only a few tricky intersections. I think it's absolutely a good thing for people to disagree and have healthy debate about this, Darren Givens writes, but the debate needs to be informed by the fact that building rail for current conditions is a mistake, as evidenced by our past, and that remedying that mistake means thinking about high-capacity transit in a new way. Opposing Beltline rail in terms of what the conditions are on the corridor today is a bad faith argument. It's unfair to the future of the city to burden it with more of that same problematic planning decisions of the past. I'll share that Instagram link in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com, as well as the article from Rough Draft Atlanta and from way back in 2019 in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I guess the thing that frustrates me the most, this reminds me of when I bought a cat tree for my two cats. And I'm taking the pieces out and I'm laying them out so that I can put it together. And my older, less agreeable cat, Herschel, starts laying in one of the soft and fuzzy bed parts before I've had a chance to put it together. And he likes it just the way it is. Leave it alone. Don't take me out of this. I want this just the way it is. But Herschel, it's destined for something bigger and better, something I know you'll enjoy once it's all put. I don't want it. Swatting and hissing, snarling, even a little growling. But there's something bigger and better coming along, buddy, if you'll just unask the thing so that I can finish putting it together. That's exactly what this is. That's exactly what we're looking at here. We're looking at, okay, it's nice as it is right now, but there's a better vision down the road. Even if you really like the way it is now, the better vision down the road, you're going to love, I promise you. But you may have to unask it for a little bit so that we can improve it. And for the record, anytime I can include my cats in an analogy, chef's kiss, podcaster 101. All right, back after this. The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or where you podcast. Follow along on your preferred social media platform. That would be at Ron Show ATL, whether it's Facebook or the Twitter X platform, Instagram. It's mostly for memes, honestly. That's just, what else are you going to do on Instagram? I do a podcast. I don't have that many photos to share, but you can follow us on Instagram, Threads as well, at Ron Show ATL, the Twitter X and Facebook platforms as well. Voters of tomorrow, President Santiago Meyer made this declaration that I wanted to point out here.
What we have seen over the past few years is a far-right attempt to, again, declare war on Gen Z. And what we are seeing right now is Gen Z declaring war back. And if there's any question about it, let me tell you, Gen Z will win this war because we have the one thing that many people in the Supreme Court don't have, and that's time.
Okay, with all due respect, Santiago, turn on the TV, buddy. You've got students on the campuses at Yale, Cal Berkeley, Columbia. There were even schools here in Georgia. Throughout the country, actually, you have sit-ins and protests and campouts where you have college students who I believe, Gen Z, who are not really happy with the fact that we are about to send more aid, not just to Ukraine, but also to Israel, and without condition. I mean, even the New York Times editorial board posted an editorial a few days ago that said, we don't need to be sending military aid to Israel unconditionally, meaning if they're going to get the aid, it cannot be unconditional. And yet, are there conditions to the aid? And by the way, the money we're sending Israel, they're not going to see anytime soon. They're not going to need it anytime soon because we've been giving them on par of $3.8 billion a year for as long as I can remember. It's the largest outlay for any foreign government in U.S. history. Israel's clearly not running low on supplies to bomb buildings and innocent civilians while hunting down Hamas. And again, I don't think I should have to point this out, but you know what? In this current climate, I feel like I have to because every student who protests on the Columbia campus, well, that's an anti-Semite. Even the Jewish students? I believe Israel has a right to defend itself and obviously has a right to go after those who perpetrated the attacks on October 7th and smite out Hamas. Please, by all means, do. Hamas is essentially a creation of Israel from years ago anyway, so clean up your mistake. I'm fine with that. Please, by all means, do that. But can we do this with some conditions, some better conditions for the civilians on the ground who are wholly innocent of the acts of October 7th? We're at 34,000 or more casualties, many of them children who absolutely have no idea the political ramifications that led to this. But I want to go back to what Santiago Meyer, Voters of Tomorrow, said. Gen Zers have more time than the political right, and that's fine. But the political left needs to be paying attention to this too. Giving aid to Israel without condition on a bill that also is attached to a TikTok ban. I'm not dismissing what our intelligence officials tell us about TikTok. I just don't understand why the White House is just, yep, let's sign this. I get it. Ukraine needs the aid. If you got to tie it all together, by all means, get the aid out. but also be crafting the messaging so that you can explain to the TikTok generation why TikTok is involved in this. They're not really. It's just part of our intelligence and national security. And I'm not going to listen. It's above my pay grade. I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about the rationale behind that because it's, again, way out of my pay grade. I understand what they're saying. I believe them. But I also think there's got to be a better way to spin this. It's not, to me, first of all, it's not a TikTok ban. It's a TikTok ultimatum. It's an ultimatum to the Chinese entity that owns TikTok to divest. Oh, there's that word again. Hi, Columbia University. To divest TikTok in the United States to a company that the U.S. government would be happy with owning it. So, yeah, it's not a TikTok ban. It's not like the second that Joe Biden signed the thing, TikTok's off your phone or doesn't work anymore. And that's actually not what would happen anyway. You would just start seeing performance lag and no updates, et cetera, and so on. It's about the PR, and Democrats, again, are proving that they are really bad with the PR part of this.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So, as is the case, if you listen very often, you know sometimes I can be a little bit of the skeptic, the cynic, the bad cop, and that requires a good cop from time to time. And that's why I like having my friend Andrew Heaton on from Sagamore Hill Consulting. Andrew, of course, working in the primary season, so I know you're pretty busy. I want to thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time this morning as you are taking care of candidates who are on the primary ballot, which is coming up, by the way.
Yeah, it is May 21st here in Georgia, and so it's the busy season. But no, always happy to hop on with you.
So while we are going to the ballot, or while we're going to vote in the primary here very soon for how we want to see our party leadership shaping up for the general election, there's still a little bit of a tug of war going on within the party as well, which is why I really wanted to bring you on, because I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm kind of having some roll age moments, popping some Tums now, as I watch the protests springing forth on university and college campuses throughout the country. This isn't just a Columbia, Yale, Cal, Berkeley, super liberal, elite, Ivy League kind of thing. This is real. I mean, President Biden's going to come speak to the commencement address at Morehouse, and we're already seeing some pushback from Morehouse students about, don't treat this like a token stop, and be respectful of the climate and the situation. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing happening right now across college campuses in the midst of an election cycle with so much on the line?
It's interesting because I think you and I, we spoke about this. We've spoken about it a couple of times, but, I remember when we first kind of spoke about when it was just really starting to bubble up, the pushback to the Israel-Palestine war in Gaza. And when we talked about it back in the winter, one of the things I said was, it was so early to tell, and it was hard to see how the effect might be. And we'd have to, one of the big things was how long was it going to drag out? And that would really kind of take the effect. Now, unfortunately, we're in April, almost May, and we're not getting any signs out of Israel that they're planning on stopping anytime soon. And obviously, we just signed off on a large aid package. And yeah, it's, I'm going to be honest, as much as I try to look at the positive of these situations and see what the best result might be, I'll be honest, even I'm starting to get very nervous about what this is going to do to overall Democratic voter enthusiasm, especially amongst young voters. And that is really where the bulk of this, the most vocal, angry pushback is coming from. You are getting it also from some specific communities. Obviously, we saw that in Michigan. We're seeing it in a couple other places, but it really is by and large a youth-driven protest pushback movement. And so that goes twofold for me. One, I wonder how large that will still be by the time we come November. And if so, between now and then, what is the administration going to do to start trying to really engage this movement? I think to date, they've kind of tried to just, let it play out and I don't know how much longer they can just let it play out. I think there has to come a point where there has to be some real honest engagement between the administration and the movement. And, and that's difficult because it's not like this is a singular movement with a singular leader.
Mm-hmm.
This really is a true definition of grassroots pushback. So yeah, I'll be honest. I am nervous and would like to see the administration start to make some moves. And you're starting to hear it. What tells you that folks are getting nervous is when you're starting to see more and more, leaders within the ranks in the Senate and the House, the number of folks getting a little more vocal about, okay, I think it's time we push for a ceasefire. Okay, this might need to be the last round of aid we send to Israel until we start to see some real changing tactics and figure out what the end game here is. And so you're starting to see party leadership is really trying to send signals that this cannot continue on as is.
As you mentioned, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock gave a speech, I don't know, was it a month or two ago, that really was sort of, I believe, one of the highest echelons of government service that we've heard from somebody who spoke about a ceasefire in that manner, to his credit, to point that out. But I'm a real concerned because it feels like this last aid package that went out was almost a little bit of a lose-win-lose scenario because Israel got its aid, Ukraine's getting its aid, which obviously the administration is happy about, but also the TikTok ban's wrapped up into that. So when you look at that under 30 voter, in general, I'm not being specific, but in general, they're not happy about the Israeli aid. They're not happy about the potential for a TikTok ban. And while they may be supportive of Ukraine, I think the two outweigh the three. And I almost wonder if this was just, Speaker Johnson playing chess while we're playing checkers.
Well, now, given what we've seen out of the House Republican leadership over the last 6 to 10 months, I would be wary of ever attributing them chess. But with that said, I think, look, I think let's not give the House Republicans too much credit for pushing us into specifically the aid to Israel. I mean, that was what the administration was looking for.
True.
And look, we cannot put aside. Israel is still strategically a very important ally to the United States. Of
course.
And just like there were, if we go back to, some of our own military endeavors that were not particularly popular in the countries and with some of the base voters of some of our allies, and yet those allies still would continue to support us with resources, logistics, things like that. It's not uncommon that you continue to support an ally even if on the ground you might not necessarily be aligned with all of their strategic goals and what they're doing in the moment. So let's not attribute so much the Israel piece. Now the TikTok ban, again, this is something that it's going to be unpopular in the sense of it feels like you're taking away something fun because you don't understand it. I think this might be a situation where I think the administration and specifically our national security apparatus, they might understand it a little better than the average citizen. And I think what I kind of defer to is like, if you got pretty much every national security advisor and point person saying like, no, there are legitimate, serious concerns with security in the way that data is accessed because of where the data is stored for TikTok. I think that is, again, that's a legitimate issue that they address now, whether this was the right way to go about it. And again, whether they have done the proper amount of education. And I think that's one of the things we always talk about when it comes to the Democratic Party and Democratic administrations is even if we're doing the right thing,
messaging,
we might not be messaging it in a way that conveys why it's the right thing. And I think this could be a perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not that I necessarily find myself in disagreement with pushing TikTok to divest its American footprint to another company. That's not the problem I have with it. I think the problem I have with it is, again, the optics of it. And again, the timing. Here we've got college students camping out and protesting and all being, by the way, lumped in as anti-Semites. I take umbrage to that because I'm not exactly fond of Israel's military antics since October 7th. I mean, obviously, they have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to go after Hamas, but 34,000 plus Gazan citizens all running around, being pushed to and fro to get out of the way or not really given the time to, and aid's not getting in there fast enough. I have problems with finding myself in disagreement, not in lockstep with everything that Israel's doing. And potentially being lumped in as anti-Semitic when that is not at all where my heart is. I work on the side for a man running for Congress who is, a Jewish American. So this is who, by the way, is also not exactly rubber stamping Israel's policies and procedures either. I just feel like all of this is all coming together and just making like an optic stew that stinks. It's not something we want to ladle up to right now.
No, I would agree with that. And you're right. I definitely think it is unfair to lump all of the opposition as anti-Semitic. I think it's a bit of a rhetorical trick that some folks are using to try to dismiss all of the protests and dismiss all of the concerns. I think one issue that kind of makes it hard is like any youth-driven movement. Younger people can sometimes be a little glib.
Yeah.
They can be a little loose with language.
Yes.
And so I do think sometimes you're seeing posters, you're hearing chants.
Yes.
That maybe a movement that had a little bit more thought to care of the language might stop and say, okay, let's think about the signal we're sending with this. And that's not unique to this movement. That happens in all kind of mass movements. You end up in like pockets here and there. But I think you're right. To try to dismiss the entire pushback on this war and our support for it to just pure anti-Semitism is wildly unfair. You and I both know legislators here in Georgia who have very valid reasons for being opposed to the war that you would never in a million years accuse them of being anti-Semitic. And so I do think that's being used as to try to, it's a political trick to some degree to try to just dismiss all of it out of hand. And I think like anything, we can't let that stop us from really engaging the conversation, because we have to engage the conversation.
Yes, and I think fostering the dialogue is part of that messaging that can be made better by the current administration. We're with Andrew Heaton, political consultant with Sagamore Hill Consulting. Let's bring this home a little bit. Arizona's Attorney General yesterday levied charges against some of Trump's co-conspirators, not necessarily Donald Trump. Maybe they don't have the phone call that we have with Brad Raffensperger on tape. But I can't help but notice that Arizona at the state level is doing what Georgia at the state level refused to do. Thank you, Chris Carr. But that Fani Willis and her department at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office is having to do. When you saw the news broke yesterday, the correlations, it had to come to your mind as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that's important about Arizona to note is that Trump himself is not indicted. Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator in the Arizona case.
But a co-conspirator nonetheless.
But, Ron, and I think we've talked about this before as well, I don't know the best way to say, like, it's not that I'm uninterested in these cases. I think these are important cases. They should be prosecuted. We need to get to the root of it. But I think too much, a lot of the Democratic voters, the Democratic base, the kind of what I call the resistor wave that have been on the streets since 2017, 2016, they are very wrapped up in these trials, and they think these are the silver bullets to take out Trump. It's just not. Because, I mean, you look at the Republican base, like, they do not care.
No, of course not.
And in fact, it gets their blood up. Like, they're excited. They're like, oh yeah, once again, we got proof that the deep state is against our guy. And once again, the deep state is trying to bend the rules against him, and it doesn't matter. The truth be damned.
Yeah.
The underlying facts be damned. It's a tool for them. And I don't know how much you engage in your peers on the right and listening to some of that, but I try to dip into right-wing media now and then just to take the temperature. And they're running with it.
Yeah.
This is just, once again, Joe Biden using the apparatus of the state to prosecute a political rival, and every one of these new things just adds fuel to them.
Okay.
And so,
but on the contrary, in Pennsylvania, we had 150,000 GOP voters show up to vote for Nikki Haley last night. So, I mean, it's not as if that there isn't some sort of residual effect on the right.
And that's absolutely true. And you could say that those are the cases. I guess my thing is, I don't know how much new stuff is going to, like, I think you would have seen that same vote, whether Arizona happened or not. I think you would have seen something like, at the end of the day, we've seen consistently through these Republican primaries, you do have about 20 to 30% of the GOP base that, given their druthers, they would love to have another nominee. They're just kind of exhausted by the Trump circus.
Right.
The question is, and this is the struggle, that's great to see them do that in a primary. How many of them will decide they're so fed up with it they'll vote for Joe Biden in November? And there is where I have my qualms about how much of that's actually going to carry over. I'm optimistic, but not extremely optimistic.
Yeah, I believe I've opined about this actually. I believe that 4 years later, I think a lot of the never Trumpers that were just going to draw on, they're getting to the point now where they realize 4 more years of Joe Biden or Democrats in control of the White House, period, and the potential for overtaking the Senate and winning back the House, which the numbers should be there for. The potential for that may be too grim for them as party acolytes, as hardcore partisans, to just sit on the sidelines and not vote for whoever their nominee is. That's the thing that concerns me. I feel like there's going to be enough peel-off from the never-Trumpers to come back into the fold that puts us in a perilous position on the general election in November.
No, I agree. I mean, if you think about the environments, one of the things that gave aid to the never-Trumpers in feeling comfortable kind of switching sides was the fact that, post-COVID, we had some real economic national emergencies facing us, and they felt they had seen enough that they couldn't trust Trump in the moment. Well, now they kind of see it somewhat the opposite. They are, with the distance of time, they look rosily upon the economic picture pre-COVID, and now they look at, we're continuing to fight inflation, we're continuing to fight rising housing costs, groceries, all this, and so for them, they can use that as an excuse to say, okay, it's time to come back home. I gave Biden a shot, but man, I sure miss those 2017, 2018 economic days.
Even though that they were basically Obama driven and that Trump's economy.
Yeah. No, and look, we can go down a whole rabbit hole of how much do individual presidents actually, influence economic changes and right. certain aspects of the economy, and how long is a hangover from one administration's choice to the other. Sure, we can go down that rabbit hole. The vast majority of voters don't take the time to do that. They say, how do I feel right now? How did it feel in the moment with the other guy?
More with Andrew Heaton on The Ron Show when we return after this on America One Radio. RonShowATL.com is the web address. Visit the website if you want to hear entire episodes of the show. Maybe you tune in midway through on America One Radio or on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com. I understand that completely. RonShowATL.com is the site. Got just a few more minutes with Andrew Heaton from Sagamore Hill Consulting, political consultant, working the campaign trail this morning, heading off to take care and be there for one of his candidates. We've got the primary coming up next month. My gosh, it's coming fast. I wanted to ask you about Governor Brian Kemp and his posture last week. He took a hardline stance on just basically taking the oxygen out of the room. There will be no Medicaid expansion in 2025 as far as he's concerned. I read a piece that Jay Bookman wrote on the 18th, last Thursday, as a matter of fact, in the Georgia Recorder, where he sort of surmises that he thinks Brian Kemp is sort of waiting for his 11th hour moment to expand Medicaid on the way out the door and then use that to his advantage electorally. I thought he meant to run for the Senate seat against John Ossoff, but when I spoke to Jay Bookman via text a couple days ago, he says, no, I think he's going to sit that one out and run for president. Where's your mind on that?
I don't have the same thought look, obviously Kemp has been doing a lot to expand his national profile. He's been, trying to be more vocal when given the opportunities, hitting some national media spots. Whether him and his team, and whether First Lady Marty Kemp, as so many people say, as Marty and the girls, whether they as Marty and the girls, whether they have an appetite for a presidential run, I don't know about that. I think that's maybe a bit much. My money is on a senatorial run against Ossoff in 26, and I kind of take the exact opposite tact. Like I don't think he sees any political advantage by expanding Medicaid. Maybe, I'm sure, I haven't read Bookman's piece. I'm sure you could make the case that would give him an inroad with middle and moderate voters who might see the appeal to expanding Medicaid. But I think he takes a risk there because it undercuts that he has taken this firm, hard stance from an economic perspective about expanding Medicaid, and I don't see why he would want to undercut himself at the last minute for the potential electoral gain. I think he's going to stick to his guns on this, as much as I wildly disagree with them, and think that the economic case for not expanding Medicaid really makes no sense unless you're just purely appealing to broader national Republican sentiment about, well, if we expand Medicaid here, that really taxpayers in the long run are still. I mean, you have to make this very convoluted. I've heard it a couple times. Convoluted argument to say why economically it doesn't make sense, because in the reality of Georgia's budget and how much Georgia voters have to pay, like, it makes no economic sense that we're not expanding Medicaid. And what they're trying to do is actually costing more money to cover the same amount of people. And we're not even covering this, like, that would be covered if we actually expanded. So the economic case for it is very, very poor. But with that said, I don't see him trying to come in as a white knight at the last minute. I think he's made his decision, and that's what he's going to stick to. And I think the fact that he's going to stick to his guns is going to be part of any potential future run.
Last question I want to ask you, because I know you got to get into your event here pretty soon. The Beltline rail noise. This story, this to me comes across again as another one of those scenarios where Atlanta city leaders are kind of fumbling the optics, the message, as they did with the Cop City movement. Now we're starting to see some walking back of conversation about rail along the Beltline, and there is a strident push. There are folks who are just steadfast. They understand that that's part of the DNA of the Beltline all along. And now you're starting to hear talk about, like, autonomous driverless cars instead of the rail. That's not going to be any more popular for those who don't want rail along the Beltline, is it? Is Mayor Dickens and are they screwing this up? Are they not thinking about the future of what the city needs, and the Beltline in particular, its impact on mobility in the city?
I won't go so far as to say they're screwing up per se, and I'll be honest, as a City of Atlanta resident, I don't follow as closely some of the ins and outs of this, but I will say that I do think holistically long term, they've been making some choices that really kind of go against what the entire spirit and ethos of the Beltline was from day one. And that's put them at odds with a lot of the long-term supporters of the Beltline. And I do think it creates an idea, and it creates a sentiment that the vision for what the Beltline was supposed to be and always was meant to be is being sold out to, moneyed interests for what the Beltline is currently. Yeah. And right now it's a fun recreational, tool that also takes you to some really hip, upper class and, middle upper class spots. And why rock that boat? Which is never what the Beltline was supposed to be when Ryan Gravel, designed it 20 years ago. But so I think the problem has been that there has been a seeming sense that there has been too much give in to what it is currently, instead of trying to fulfill the vision of what it was meant to be. And I think the Dickens administration finds itself kind of trying to appease both masters in that sense. And is just creating a real muddied, cloudy vision of, like, okay, what do you actually want to happen here?
Yeah. It feels again where I feel like he's more amenable to the moneyed interest, just like the Cop City Center. I feel like he's more amenable to the moneyed interest than to what the citizens are actually saying to him. All right, listen, I know you got to go. I want to thank you for the time. Andrew Heaton, political consultant with Sagamore Hill Consulting. Thank you for joining the Ron Show this morning. I appreciate it, buddy. Have a good day.
All right, Ron. You have a good one.
Show note, by the way, tomorrow we will have founder and CEO of the new Disabled South and Disabled South Rising, Dominic Kelly, joining us. We'll do some more hand-wringing about the protests happening at Gen Z voters and where they're going to be come November 2024. You heard Andrew Heaton. He's nervous. I'm nervous. I'm sure Dominic Kelly, in fact, I know he's more than nervous. He's angry. So if you look forward to that, Here's what I'm looking forward to tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing what my Atlanta Falcons are going to do with that 8th pick in the NFL draft. My hunch is they trade back. No, I think they trade back. There are teams that need quarterbacks that may offer them some additional picks, and they can get a lot of what they want to accomplish by moving back a few spots and picking up some additional second, third round picks, which they may lose next year anyway, because the new quarterback, Kirk Cousins, hasn't even played a down of football and already fumbled at his press conference by letting them know that was some tampering going on beforehand. Anyway, best of luck to my Falcons tonight. It's going to do it for the Ron Show. Replay today, 5 to 6 p.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. On demand at ProgressiveVoices.com as well, and via podcast. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Have a great one.